Oh, somebody's alarm went on.
No, it's 7 o'clock.
Good evening. We're going to begin here in a second. At this time, I would like to call the April 6, 2022 budget meeting of the Board of Education to order. We will now recite the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. I'll accept a motion to approve the agenda presented before us this evening.
So moved. Second, Bernice.
And second, Bernice. Any discussion?
Just one moment of discussion, and it's specifically about how the agenda policies and practices have been happening as of late, and the concern that I have, and that I very much hope and am asking, formally requesting, that we have a conversation about specifically policy 1321, 1510, 1511, because our board president is acting unilaterally outside of her role and responsibility. And it is something that we should be gravely concerned about as we are moving forward and making decisions. Are we a democracy or are we a monarchy? And I want to make sure that is publicly known and that we address it as a board. And at that time, I will be sure to forward, after this meeting, I will forward the relevant policies to the rest of the board for us to review and to add to an agenda to discuss, because it is gravely disturbing how this has happened.
Thank you, Jamaica. All right, any other comments or questions? All those in favor of the current agenda, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? The motion carries. All right, we have our budget presentation by Terry Galili.
Good evening.
Is your mic on?
He's got to turn that over there. Hold on. Try now.
Hello.
Oh, there you are.
Sorry. Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
Yep. All right. Last week we reviewed the draft budget. Tonight is just basically a quick overview of everything. A couple minor changes that we made, some additions, and we'll show you how we allocated the funds necessary to move some money into the ARP federal grant funds. So again, this budget supports our pillars, our budget mission. Overall, the budget proposal is $239,167,067, an increase of $20 million from the current year, or a 9.29% increase. I just want to point out, that is a large increase from year to year. However, as we review leading up to tonight, that does include a $4 million repair reserve that we are funding through the appropriated repair reserve, which represents 1.83% of that. There was a debt increase in payments of 1.17% increase. And then we had a large increase in transportation expenditures from last year's budget to the current year expenditures, and the projected increase in costs next year, which equates for like 1.83% of that. So overall, those three things combined is approximately 4.83% of that 9.29%. So like the instructional and the student support services and everything else is about 4.46% total of that increase. Keep in mind that the debt service and transportation, we get state aid back on those. So that's why we saw the increase in aid also that we shared last week, and I'll review again quickly this week. The CRRSA and the ARP grant allocation, when we submitted the application, when we received the money for the budgeting for those funds, some money was allocated to the teaching and learning, adding additional teachers to support the students' needs. Special education, we had a few positions in there, again, to support the student needs and the health and well-being of them, in addition to the student support services and some of the employee benefits that are tied to those additional positions. So last week when we presented, we had about a $3.5 million budget gap. We're using those funds, about $3.8 million, that we took out of the general fund budget and will pay out of the federal fund next year. Breakdown, just a pie chart to show what majority of the expenditures are, and that is for the instructional program, obviously, $134 million, and with the employee benefits related to current staff and the retirees of the district. Revenue source, state aid makes up 72.76% of the budget, with a tax levy making up 24.31, as we recommended previously, 0% tax levy increase. We'll review that again. So rather than going through line by line detail, we'll provide that when once the budget is adopted. But in the meantime, this is just like a summary and the total FTEs in each category that we previously reviewed on the pie chart. Similar FTEs in the support group, you'll see the central services, OM, safety, storeroom printing, that is the increase. Some of the paraprofessionals, who were previously categorized as security and safety down in the instructional piece, moved up into central services as part of our safety. And also we added additional O&M staffing that we reviewed during the process, how they were understaffed, not utilized, not rehired from the layoffs. So we're seeing a large increase in the O&M and safety for those two departments. You'll see those decreases in the instructional piece when we review that.
And just, O&M is operations and maintenance, so
Yeah.
okay, sometimes we, in education, use acronyms for everything.
Sorry, yeah. The instructional proposed budget, the $134 million, which includes our district office, central offices, with the Office of Teaching and Learning and Accountability. Supervision administration, we added the assistant principals that were currently vacant, so we want a couple there. Clerical FTEs, we added some additional positions that were needed throughout the district, some attendance paras, and some other clerical positions that were left vacant. Planning and accountability, that was based off a majority of the study for BOCES, the need for those positions throughout the district, and some of them are reclassing. We had those incorrectly coded previous years, like to a building, whereas they should have been to the actual district office. We increased the amount in professional development for the staff members to attend, either over the summer or during superintendent professional days. Moving on to the instructional and the special education. As you can see, the asterisk, 35 FTE reported in the federal funds for the CRRSA and ARP. This is a hiring of additional teachers and filling positions that we currently have vacant that we reviewed last week. So bringing them back, and it will be sustained based on the increase of state aid that we receive next year to $15 million. So it's not a concern that we're paying them out of the grant to use those funds up and then bringing them back into the general fund, because we'll have the additional funds for that at a future date. So the asterisk represents, you may see a minus in FTE, but that's just a minus overall in the general fund, but in the federal fund, obviously we're increasing. So overall, everything will be increased with the FTEs.
So you're saying we would be at 617, basically, those
Yeah,
35?
exactly.
So it's up from the 598
Yeah,
that's
yep,
showing?
yep, absolutely,
Okay.
yep. The special education, again, same situation. Paraprofessionals, if you look at the instructional special education, we had paraprofessionals incorrectly coded in prior year and current year, and we are meeting with every individual principal starting tomorrow and Friday to review their staffing and their FTEs and their needs for building base. So as we reviewed this whole process, we met with everybody, we talked to them about the expenditure side. Tomorrow, we have the people identified in the budget. We just want to make sure that people are allocated equitable throughout the district and what their need basis is per building. So reviewing the budget, the process, going through it, we recognize some paraprofessionals may be coded as something that they're not really doing, or incorrectly coded as something where they should be a mandated special ed. So we are looking at all the mandates, what is needed, and categorize those correctly.
You went through it very quickly before on the switch on O&M and so on, and I noted that the 35, that the paras are, I believe it's 30 people, fewer between these two lines, the paraprofessionals, FTE, under instruction, and the ones under special education. Okay, those 30 have been absorbed over in O&M, is that?
Either O&M and safety.
And safety.
Yeah, we were hiring paraprofessionals to do hall monitoring duties, student
That's what
supervision duties that were not mandated, so we moved them. You know, as we mentioned last time, we talked about the safety budget, they have the opportunity to move up to those positions with the proper training.
And that's what you were, that's what I wanted to clarify.
Yes.
Yeah, and so in the budget, and historically in the past, the district has put them under instructional, when the reality is they did no instructional work. They supervised hallways, they monitored hallways, they did supervision. So we're trying to appropriately code it, so those positions, that's why you saw that 118 to 178 increase.
Right.
We moved those paraprofessional.
So overall there, we've got an increase of 30 people in that category.
Yep.
So it means that we actually don't have enough paraprofessionals that are actually assisting in the classrooms because those individuals are in our hallways and doing other things.
Paraprofessionals are not instructional. They are more of support. So they're not instructional, like a teacher assistant would be more
They can't be left
instructional.
alone with a group of kids technically, because they're not certified to be alone with a group of kids.
So then what is the classification for someone who supports a classroom?
So a para would be in addition to a teacher being in the room, so let's say there's like,
Yep.
then you would add a para, but they could not be necessarily alone.
Right, and so, but that's what I'm saying, that our teachers are alone and they need support in the classroom. And is that what a paraprofessional could do?
Paraprofessional could do that, correct.
And so we have far less paraprofessionals than we thought because they weren't actually operating in roles as paraprofessionals.
If you look at the paraprofessionals in special education, they're from 185 to 254.
Yeah, so we,
So
For
we're
special
reviewing-
education, but I'm
But
talking general
they're
use
not,
classrooms.
they may not be categorized correctly, so that's what we're reviewing with the building levels, and they may be coded as special education, but they might be in a regular classroom
yeah,
also.
I guess I want to try to understand the question better, Jamaica. Are you asking,
How
we
many
don't
of
have
our
any of them
classrooms?
in just regular gen ed classrooms?
How many of our classrooms actually have paraprofessional support?
Right, so-
Especially at the elementary and middle school
Yeah,
level,
so,
but
so
also.
typically pre-K would be the ones, and then a principal could assign a non-mandated para where they saw a need for support. And that's where we're finding the discrepancies between buildings. This school may have 7, this school has 2, and we're trying to figure out how was that determined. So that's part of the equity conversation we're having with the schools tomorrow. But there was no real formula for it, there was no real approach for it, you know, so we're trying to figure that out. But typically where we would place an instructional para would be UPK, pre-K, kindergarten, and then anything else that would be targeted for a student with disability or something that was a high need. Sometimes they're supervising a group of kids that, for transitions, or they need a second person in the class because it's got 30 kids in it, you know, something of that nature. But there isn't necessarily a universal approach that these classrooms get a second body when they get to this threshold of number of kids, or it's typically principal driven around where those extra paras go. In the past, they would use them for operational things. Lunch coverage, morning breakfast coverage, hall coverage. So in the past, they haven't been used for instructional, but we labeled them as instructional paras. And we're saying, if they haven't been used for that, let's label them appropriately, and then we'll have the conversation around what else is needed for instructional support.
So then can those, or is that what y'all are gonna do, is create those parameters so that it's, you know, common practice if there's more than 25 kids in a classroom, then we know that class should have a paraprofessional, or what are the metrics to determine when a teacher needs support, because 25 kids is still a lot.
Yeah, I agree with you, but we don't have like a formula yet or anything like that, but we're gonna have some conversations with principals tomorrow, get a better sense of how they use the term we use in the budget is non-mandated. So the non-mandated paraprofessional, how you use that, what do they, tell me more about what they do, where does that come up with? But yes, the goal is, the budget we're presenting though would be our expenditure. The bigger question for us is where do we shift people within that expenditure? And then after the fact, if we need to come back and say we need more, the goal would be is we come back after the budget hopefully is approved, and then we can add more where there's necessary. But there is no formula that says we get to this, we add this. That isn't uncovered, and it normally isn't common practice, but I definitely understand what you're advocating for.
School library, as we mentioned previously, we're going to staff a librarian in each building, so we're increasing the number of librarians in each school. And the computer assistant instruction, the IT department, we had a reduction in staff. However, we replaced that with the BOCES service, which we receive BOCES aid on the following year of those expenditures.
How much is our obligation to BOCES for that computer staff or assistants or whatever?
I'd have to get, off the top of my head, I'm not sure, but it's over like about $1 million maybe for all their services, staffing, IT services, the support, software,
It's about
firewall
75%
system.
we get, I believe, around there back the following
Yeah,
year.
yep.
Okay.
Instructional, student support services. We went through all the numbers previously based on enrollment. School counselors, again, the asterisks, we're paying 12 of them out of the federal funds, the CRRSA and the ARP grant funds, but we did increase those by 6 overall. Last week it was asked in regards to the number of services that we are currently providing throughout the district. We have about 630 students who are receiving counseling service. We have 51 staff members for that, so it's a ratio of 1 to 12. Our OT and PT staff seek about 286 students, some of them getting both OT and PT. We have about 12 staff members, 9.5 through BOCES and 2.5 through the district, so that's like a 1 to 24 ratio. And then overall, additional 150 students are receiving services by crisis prevention team by 24 staff members, so that's like a 1 to 22 ratio. And there is currently no waiting list, so those who are seeking the service are being provided that service.
Those are the numbers for those that are seeking the service, but we have no data of how many actually need the service, right? There's nothing that could say we've done an assessment and asked.
If it's identified on their IEP, then that's the need basis, but I'm not.
I mean, I'm thinking.
I'm not the
Right,
professional.
I'm thinking especially about the students that are receiving any mental health services or crisis prevention right now. Are those all individuals that they, came forward and said, I need help?
Typically, it's staff-driven referrals, typically drive that, classroom teacher, they have teams that meet in the building, talk about which kids may need in crisis. That's typically staff-driven, so a kid doesn't have to tell no one, but could be exhibiting signs in their, what is the group that meets, the name of the group that meets, counselors, psychologists, the
School-based team?
school-based,
Intervention team.
School-based intervention, SBIT, yeah, I knew the acronym, but I didn't know so the school-based intervention team would meet, identify kids who may be struggling academically, what else could it be, and then sometimes those are where the referrals, but we don't have we didn't give like a general survey to all kids, like a universal screener that would say, I think that's kind of what you're getting to, is there like a universal indicator that helps us for kids who may not come forward, right?
Yes, because
Okay.
my concern is that there are students that have not been identified that need services, and we're not able to reach them.
With regard to the 12 that are part of the CRSA and the ARP funds and so on, how is it that we're providing that in end of 24 or June of 24?
Yeah.
That, if these monies go away, that the positions can still be accommodated in our general fund?
Yep, that's the 15 million that we're getting in excess. So it's about the amount that we're paying out of the 2 federal grants up here. We're showing about 3.8 million.
Right.
So if you add the extra 15 million in, it covers that in addition to other contract obligations and other
You're
costs.
saying we're using 3.8 million
Currently in the
out of the
22-23 budget,
out of the general fund, out of the
federal fund
out of
for
the
those
ARPA,
positions.
ARPA and the
Yep.
CRS,
Yep.
whatever, CRS.
CRRSA,
somebody-
yeah.
somebody
Yep.
else.
We're using some of that now this year, And let me get to the slide there, here. We're getting 41 million. And those allocations here, you see the student support services, we have $4 million allocated for that. We didn't use all of that in 21, 22, so that's why it's not, although it's designated for that year, we don't have to have it completed by the end of this fiscal year. It just has to be done by September 30th of 2024.
Okay, and so we would plan on having in 23, 24, and 24, whatever year, we are going into 22, 23, 23, 24, and 24, 25, the 15 million, give or take, that we're getting from an additional general funds from our
state.
foundation aid,
Yep.
more foundation aid, we would use that funding for
To bring them back into the general
staff
fund.
support
Yep.
for general fund.
Absolutely. Yep.
Okay.
Transportation, you know, the increase, the need, the increase in cost, contractual services, the increase of the CDTA, all the private contracts, you know, getting back to more normalcy with the additional sports programs, start doing some field trips, and then the additional, you know, private schools and special needs for a lot of our students. So that was the increase, and again, we get 90% back the following year.
That's a big jump there, that 4 million.
Yeah,
I-
so
I
just-
Yeah,
noticed
absolutely.
that.
And I don't know if we accurately budgeted for the 21, 22 with the current cost, so.
And how things were, well, yeah, and
Exactly.
inflation and all the rest of it.
Yep, and we have a lot more.
Yeah,
need.
we've gotten a lot of pushback from the vendors that, you know, gas is at a higher price now. So, you know, we've not changed anything currently, but when they're new, in the new contracts for the following, you can see where things have grown with,
And contracts are CPI, which is
yeah, they follow the
Consumer
CPI.
Price Index, which is like, what, 6%
Yeah.
now? So that could increase the cost of the contracts. And again, you got to keep in mind, you know, it is a larger expenditure, but we do get 90% back from the state on that.
And that includes the CDTA
Yep,
portion
Yep.
of that.
Mhm.
Okay.
Employee benefits, you know, all the current employees and any retirees, our contributions to the retirement benefit system, the increase in salaries, you know, with the decrease in ERS rate, but the increase in salaries kind of offsets that. I just want to make a note of it, health insurance, we had our final meeting with the Health Insurance Committee meeting. We're looking at increases with the Blue Shield Blue Plan, 6.5%, the Blue Shield Red Plan, 1.99%, and the CDPHP, for those that still have that, is 6.6%. You know, industry-wide, you know, the 1.99, which a majority of our people, current employees are on, is an excellent percent increase compared to industry, and, you know, we are a self-insured plan, so it's out-of-the-pocket expenditures. And then, you know, everything else related to that is an increase of a little bit over $1 million, and as I mentioned previously, some of the benefits related to bringing the cost of those other people over to the federal funds are being paid out of the federal funds also, the related FICA and retirement contributions, and they would be sustainable when you bring them back. Our proposed budget debt service, again, as I mentioned previously, we're seeing an increase in the amount that we owe for borrowings in previous years. However, again, that is aidable. New York State pays us back on those amounts that we're paying on those obligations, 95, 98%. So the increase that we reviewed last week, and I'll show you again, the increase that we are showing for building aid from the executive run, you know, makes up for that differences. Capital outlay, you know, every year you always have in the budget a $100,000 capital project. New York State allows you to have 3 types of capital projects. One, an emergency project. If something comes up, you submit your proposal to New York State Ed, you get the aid on that. They allow you to have $100,000, up to $100,000 capital project. Each year, if you put in a request where voters vote on it as part of the budget, you write up a plan, you can make any repair you need to in the school for $100,000. We'll get 95%, 98% back the same year that that project is completed. So that's part of that 425. And then we also added the $4 million, which is appropriation of the repair reserve fund to make those necessary repairs that are listed there that have been identified that need to be complete it. We may receive some building aid on that if they go above and beyond those, but the source of revenue will be from our reserve funds to make those repairs. And we have to submit those type of repairs to SED for approval with our architect writing up those plans. So as we have like the $4 million there, it's good to have the other 325 for any of those contingency costs that may go above and beyond the 4 million that we projected.
Is this, are these particular projects locked in as such? I mean, if our building conditions survey identified a new roof for, I don't know, one of the schools or something like that, I'm just using an example. That could be substituted for something like the other
Yeah,
or the
we have
water
not
line
submitted
or-
any plan, and
Right.
as I mentioned last week, I took it
It
off
has
this
to
slide.
go to-
It has to go through public hearing. So my, recommendation, once we, finalize, budget's approved, come back and have a public hearing on ones that we have to have done now, like a boiler needs to be done, the water needs to be done. Have a public hearing on all those. We'll submit those plans to SED, get the approval, and have that work completed. So, but if they, from the building conditions survey, recognize that a roof needs to be done, and if it can't be covered on that cost, we may have to go out and do like a capital bond
Oh,
project.
that would
Yeah.
possibly take more. I was
Yeah,
trying to get
exactly.
one that
I
might be
got you.
equivalent to something
Yeah, absolutely,
that's
with
here.
something that's
But
safety,
I
yeah.
can't think
Yeah,
of
like,
that, so.
yeah, exactly. So we would identify what the more pressing needs and categorize those and fill those out.
And just know these are been kind of identified through Turner Construction, who has been doing the last phase of the capital as kind of priority, as the things that they've uncovered. These have kind of been things they can't cover within the budget now. And so, as we talk about space, class size, right now, if we had to use Fulton, we couldn't because the boiler is not functional for us. And we know we live in an area where you need a boiler. So we got to repair that. And, in order to use that facility, the pool is really big for us here for our programming, and it's the only pool that we have that's indoors for our kids in this area. So, we got to get that fixed. Tennis courts are currently inoperable, which is why we prioritized it. And then Yates, that site work is correlated to the capital project that we've put a big investment already there, but there's some water that's potentially challenging, so we want to fix the drainage while we're there to be done once. And then Washington Irving, there's some water line issues with lead and things of that nature, so.
When do we anticipate getting the final building condition survey?
June.
Yeah, I thought it was
Yeah,
later.
that has, well, not has to be, but that's the projection.
Yeah.
Again, the review of the federal funds, we identified 3 million. We're using some of those this year, which we'll, review at the end of the year when we set up our reserves and see how much money we have available, the current funds. The CARES Act will be utilized all this year in the current fund to 5.7 million, and then the other 2 over the next 2 years.
I think it's important to note that the other federal grants, Title I and so on, that's all ESSA.
Yeah.
But, and we've been relatively constant with
Yeah.
those funds, but there are always ones that could disappear that require advocacy. And we have a lot, the $17.5 million based on, funding current things in the general fund and specifically. So at some point, if those were to fall through, we would have difficulties.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and so, one thing I will say in the board, in the reorg, when I got here, one of the positions is a title grants person. So Tracy, who's in Dr. Mason's office, that's her full-time job. She goes out there, she pursues grants, she brings us them to review, and then we apply. So although you don't see everything here, we also have current applications in for new dollars, for new monies. We're just going after one that's a mental health one that'll potentially, if we win it, it's $500,000 a year for 5 years. So it's like $2.5 million to help with mental health and things of that nature. So just know that as a district, the board has prioritized that, and we have a position that literally just goes and looks for grants, applies for grants, brings them to us, and then we pretty much don't say no to any opportunity because it's good money. What we are more mindful of is we don't try to put FTEs in those grants, so the sustainability is we maybe lose resources, but we don't lose positions that we have invested.
And I know that the national advocacy has been in favor of IDEA for at least the last several years, 3 or 4 years that I'm aware of, probably longer, because New York State as a state gets only about 14% of what was envisioned back in 1975, I think, 74. So that's a low percentage.
Yep, and we'll show you I'll show you a budget snapshot of a building, how we allocate the use of those funds coming up. The governor's executive proposal, we reviewed this last week, so I will spend a little time on that, but it shows you the adjustments that we talked about. You know, we have the additional aid payment, and then we're making up for past projects that we filed the final cost reports. So when the final New York State budget is passed, we should see the additional funds added to the state aid runs that we receive. So we're looking at the 174 million in revenue.
I think
from-
we
from
missed a
state.
slide, because there was the
Yeah.
multicolored one, and then there was the federal fund grant
Yeah,
allocation.
yeah, we had this last week.
Well, the question I have
Oh, I'm sorry.
is, it lists summer enrichment here,
Mm-hmm.
but I didn't see summer enrichment anyplace else in the presentation. So I get how it, the money would eventually be less because we won't have those grants anymore. Are we solely relying on grants for our summer enrichment program, or does that money also exist someplace else? I just didn't see it anyplace else.
Yeah, so most of our summer learning is grant-driven. 21st Century grant is one of the funding sources for summer. We're using American Rescue Plan, which requires us to use some of that money for summer. But in terms of the overall general budget, typically we don't, because our high school programs run through BOCES, so we usually maximize off on that. And then historically, there hasn't been anything else other than grants that have driven kind of the summer school funding.
It is good to know that our summer enrichment programs are only based on grants and that it's not part of our general fund.
We have money embedded for, after-school learning. We have money for tutoring. It's included with the instructional amounts in there. And then if you look at the special school and program support, that includes the summer school on the bottom
So-
for our students to attend summer school. So part of that 64 million, we do have money allocated.
But for
For
summer
extra.
school, not summer enrichment?
No, for the
Okay.
summer school piece of
Okay.
it. That
All
hears
right.
me, yep.
Yeah, and I guess summer enrichment, summer school, part of it would be for academic recovery, like for kids to continue on. Summer enrichment would be STEAM camps,
Yeah,
that kind of
I'm thinking about our elementary schools and the programs that we
Right.
have that cover most of the summer, not all of the summer, that our students are there like 8 o'clock in the morning till 6 o'clock at night. That
Yeah,
has
so
been.
we have that going. We're going to have every site is going to be running. Dr. Coda's leading that. So we'll have that expansive program. And we have, all 3 middle schools are going to have a program as well. And then obviously the high school students will be part of the BOCES. So we will not have a lack of opportunity for kids. I think it's 8 o'clock to 8:30, 2:30, right?
Yeah, and when it initially started, it went from 8 to 6.
Oh, did it?
We fed them 3 meals a day.
Yep,
Yeah.
yep.
How long ago was that?
Last year? Or
Well,
the-
no,
the-
not
before
the
COVID.
COVID, prior to
Pre-COVID.
COVID.
Years ago.
Yeah.
Pre-COVID. Yes, because it made such a difference in childcare costs and working families. I'm one of them.
Our proposed recommendation, 0% tax levy, once again, be the 3rd year in a row. We did an allocation real quick. If you did a minus that was recommended or want us to inquire about that, a minus 1% tax levy would be about a $1.38 savings a month for an employee based on this year's valuation. So to sustain a budget and not have to go back in future years to increase tax levy to support our budget, we're still making the recommendation of 0% tax levy. People have, that in their budget for the current year, and we figure for next year, it should either be the same or maybe drop as it has in the past year based on the valuations of the taxes.
So we did include the breakdown per your request.
Also, what I'm proposing is a resolution. Last one was done in 2017 for a capital project for $2 million. I'm looking to fund an additional $5 million for capital project. And this is in anticipation of the building conditions that we're going to receive the report. All this does is allows us to have any budgetary savings that we may have in the current year and the next 5 years, that we are able to set aside some money for a future project. So there'd be 0 tax impact on the taxpayers. Although we get 95% of state aid back, that 5% we don't get back, we could use from a reserve fund to make an improvement to a building as we seem necessary.
So this is a resolution that would allow putting it into the 4 million into the
Yep,
capital.
it'll have to be a proposition as the day of the budget vote. They'll vote on the budget, and then they'll vote on if we're allowed to set up a capital reserve for $5 million to fund it through budgetary savings over the next 5 years. So, like I said, with the savings that we have, that we're able to pay some of our positions out of the federal fund, we may have current year budgetary savings that we could set aside money for future use to make repairs on some of our buildings. We
Yes.
all know the condition of our current buildings. They need a lot of repair. This will just help offset some of that cost
Right.
and going out borrowing that
So
amount.
typically, like, you would do a capital project, the most recent one, I think, was like 52 million or 60 million. Instead of
64 million.
Instead of going out for 64 million, we would go out for 59, because we would use the 5 million we have here, thus asking the community for less.
Well, we've never been, the building aid has never covered the entire cost of this.
No, it's only like
the
95%,
The
exactly.
64 million or anything. We've still gone out for 64 million, but we had other funds, we had Excel funds and
Mm-hmm.
so on, that meant that there was no additional cost to the
Yep,
taxpayer
exactly.
for the difference between what we
Yeah.
bonded and what.
So that's what I
the cost
mean, let's make it simple math, $100 million project, say we,
Right.
district-wide, everything, that's a lot of money. We'll get back 95 million from the state. We have 5 million there reserved over the last, 3 years that we're making budgetary savings. There'll be zero tax impact on our taxpayers.
Because nobody ever gets 100% of it back.
No, not stating, we're high with the 90,
We're very
95%. A lot of people, a lot of districts are 70, 40, 50, so.
And it depends on the age of the schools and all those.
There's a lot of factors
all
that
those
go into it.
factors in
Yep.
that, yeah.
So that will be on the budget vote. When they vote for the budget, there'll be additional capital project. Quick proposed budget recap, just, Annabelle reviewed all the things. We think we support a lot in this budget. It's a increase. It gets us to where we need to be as a district. It provides the opportunity for the students, based on the survey and everything that we looked at, adding additional programming if necessary throughout the schools, and gave the opportunity for each building principal and those people, I appreciate all the assistance, to provide what they need for their building. So all these items are in this budget, so it definitely provides an opportunity for all our students. Ken, can you pop up that
There was
PowerPoint?
one more thing. So on slide 12, it said co-curricular activities, and it just reminded me again. What do you mean by co-curricular activities? What does that cover?
Those are like the extra classrooms
Extracurricular activity.
for students, the extra classroom, like the clubs.
So after-school clubs and
Yep,
programs
yep.
are the
Yep,
co-curricular
and that's- yep.
activities. And then the inter-school athletics are all of our athletics.
All our
right?
athletics. And we're adding modified athletics to
middle
those. That's why you see a little bump in
Middle school
price.
sports.
Yep, middle school sports.
Okay. And so there was no increase for co-curricular activities? There's no increase for
No.
the clubs?
We haven't fully utilized what was spent in the
Yeah, I don't
budget,
know if you
so that would
remember,
be,
A couple meetings ago, we showed all the activity funds, and there was not even that money's been used that they have put aside, so we left that there for now until we saw a need, an increase, and just some of the co-curricular stuff was covered by the principals when they submitted things like field trips.
Yeah.
They covered additional opportunities for not so much clubs, but for more kids to participate in things.
that's basically the cost there is for the supervision of those students' after-school programming.
For the adults.
So
So if
that's
they,
just for
if
the
they want to
adults.
do something with that club, a lot of them fundraise where they try to get the money, but that's not part of like an activity that a building will do for like a field trip. That's in the
Separate.
instructional, separate.
And that's a good point to bring up. So there's certain things you can only do with city payers' dollars, like you can't gift certain dollars to just give it away to clubs. So that's why some organizations still fundraise, even though we have certain dollars in the organization, because they can use the money with less red tape than we could because of like certain vendors being approved, certain places being approved, where if they fundraise, they runs through either their athletic booster club or something like that. They can do some different things. So like recently, I think it was the wrestling team did the fish fry. There's less rules for them to use those dollars when they kind of drive the fundraising rules. Whereas if we have it, we've got to think about competitive bidding, which of the organizations they use, those types
So
of things.
when our clubs do fundraisers, like the wrestling club, it's unrestricted funds that they can use it any way they see
Well,
fit?
yeah, it runs through their advisory group of the club. They have a typically a treasurer or somebody?
Yeah, every club has to have a president, a teacher council, like an advisor that oversees the club, and it has to have participation by the students.
So the,
They monitor it's kind of like their own little business to
Student
teach them,
activity fund.
yeah, student activity.
so then for our athletic clubs, because wrestling is part of our athletics, what are the things that they need money for that would then be red tape? And maybe, that's something that y'all can send a list later. But the other question is, so what are we paying for the inter-school athletics? Is that just staff time? Does it include uniforms? and-
Referees, busing, uniforms,
Equipment?
the people, coaches, so.
So, and I think the wrestling club, it said on the flyer what it was to be used for, and I think some of it was to attend a wrestling camp, that sort of thing, so extra things
Yeah,
that,
they might want to buy themselves personal sweatshirts. The school's not, that we give them the uniform, but they might want to buy like a Schenectady wrestling sweatshirt.
So with the money that we have provided, they'll be fully functional with all of the gear that they need. There will be no outside cost for parents or families for their children to participate in sports.
Right, and so typically, like, I'm more familiar with basketball just because kids want to go AAU tournaments, they want to take the team to a camp. Those are things that typically we can't do. We can't buy a camp access for a group of kids, so they fundraise for those types of opportunities that go beyond. Now, if we were running the camp, then it'd be a different story. We could pay for our staff to run the camp, pay for the facilities, and then have our kids come to it. So that's one of the things that Michaela's not in the audience now, but Michaela and Dr. Cotto we're trying to expand middle school programming because we have them here. How do we add middle school programming? What can we do over breaks at our schools? But the reality is typically when you do a lot of these out-of-state tournaments or they want to get their own personal gear, we usually provide the uniform, whatever they need to compete athletically. And then we usually have the uniforms on a cycle for replacement, so that way they get one typically every 3 years or every 5 years, depending on the sport.
Thank you.
Part of the budget booklet, once we, identify the whole budget, we'll have a page for every school, so we can show transparency and that every school's getting the proper equity throughout the district. So this is just like an example of what it will look like. Each building will have their own page within that booklet.
Yeah, this slide is not, the slide didn't work out well, so this is additional.
And then, yeah. So, for example, this is Yates. I'll have a picture of the school. It has a little quote, who the principal is, and then we'll break it down. And we're still working on what the presentation is going to look like, but it'll be very similar to what this looks like. Basically, it'll show your number of teachers at the school current year and the prior year, the number of principals, assistant principals, and so forth. We may change some of those categories, but it just gives you an idea of what it's going to look like. And then below that, we'll have like the pupil-student ratio, and then the total enrollment for each school. And at the bottom, we'll break down the expenditures related to those categories above. And then if you go back to the top, on the right-hand side, you'll show how we're funding those positions. So as we spoke previously, we'll have $3.1 million in general fund, contract for excellence. We have some teachers identified for smaller classrooms, the money we receive for that. The UPK grant, we pay for the teacher and the paraprofessional in the classroom for that. And then we pay some of the teachers out of a Title I grant that are currently at Yates. So that was just an example. It doesn't identify everything within that building. So that's the process we're going to be doing, for when we distribute a budget book. It'll show a snapshot of every building. And then that way, if you have a student that attends like Yates, say, hey, Yates, what does my building look like? You'll be able to go to Yates and see the breakdown of positions at your school and how it's allocated and how it's paid for.
And this is new, so this has not been done here before, but this is my hope for transparency, right? Anybody can pick up the book, know how many is funded per school. We've never done that here, and so, as we continue to try to honor that effort of transparency, knowing where the funds go, knowing what schools get, I will say sometimes that comes with a cost in the sense that people will then want to compare buildings. But again, not every building will get the same thing. Some will have more special ed kids, some will have less. And so some of that will drive some of that title funding. And so I just want to make sure that this will be new to the board, but we will then give you a book that has every school, every campus and every program in there, along with the other things that are typically required in a traditional budget book.
Yeah, it'll have how we have to present a budget by New York State guidelines. And this is just additional information for the public.
Could you go back to page 20 and it has 6.2 million in building aid, and just explain what the difference is about that relative to
Yeah,
the other building aid things that we've
Yeah.
been
The building-
discussing.
Yeah, what happened was, executive budget, they give you your building aid, or all state budgets. You had your $67 million capital project. You file all the necessary reports after they're all done completion, and then you bond that money to pay back over 15 years. So let's say we're paying, $5 million a year in building, for those bonds. We receive building aid on that 5 million, 95 to 98%. So the aid is the portion that we're receiving back from the state. The expenditure is the debt service payment. So when you look at this slide here, the 6.2 that we discussed last week, what happened was not me, but Steve Zotner, when he got here, realized that some of our final completion reports were not completed for not this past project, but another project previously. So we started the debt payments on those projects, but the necessary paperwork was not filed. So we've been working with our advisors to get those in, once because a lot of those projects have been completed. So with that, New York State is making up the aid that we did not receive, the 6.2 million. So by doing that, we're showing an increase in aid of 6.2 million in the current year, but our payments only went up like to 2 million. So, that's why we're able to do these other, maybe reserve some of that money that we're getting back in regards to the proposition for the $5 million of budgetary savings in addition, because we're getting the aid already back, a majority of it based on our payments.
And the transportation aid that's shown here, the almost
Yep,
$2
$1.9.
million is based on what it will have expended here in 21, 22.
What happens is, we got our transportation aid of 10,655,000, and that is based on the 12 million that we projected in the current year. When I got here, I realized that we had an increased cost in transportation. When you put in the projections, you do it as of, the summertime. Now we're mid-year, I was able to go back in and adjust what we're projected to have for transportation. So by doing that, that increases the amount of aid we're going to receive next year for the cost this year.
Based on this year.
Yep,
right.
so it's based on this year, so I was able to increase our projections of our current year transportation aid, and we're going to receive the additional money. And I verified that when, they have what they call state runs, output reports, and they show you what your aid is going to be. So in the January, when they projected the aid, it was the transportation aid was 10.655, but now going back in and increasing our expected cost from 12 to like 14, we're going from 10.6 to $12 million addition.
Now, BOCES aid is also based on this year's.
Current expenditures now. That
Expenditures.
may, the executive budget in January included as of that date, I think it was like November. So when they do the final budget, there may be also an increase in BOCES aid in the final runs based on our expenditure aids this year. But that won't be, until they give us their final runs once the state budget
Once they
passes.
decide what-
Yeah, and the
Yeah, it's
budget
supposed to be
has-
done April 1st, so.
And the state budget hasn't passed yet. so
No,
we're still-
no, it has not. We have not heard anything with regard to the transportation aid money that we're owed from about 15 years ago. All right.
Yeah, there's,
There's been no additions to their
There's-
prior year
yeah.
claims. Or have you heard whether or not that category will continue to exist? Because back in February, they were projecting that they wouldn't even fund it with 18 or 19 million, which has been the typical amount.
Yeah. I
for
think,
recent years.
I received some when I got here, and I haven't, I think Mr. Zotner recognized that we may be getting some back aid payments. I think in the 23-24 school year, it's projected to get some aid payments.
You
I
know,
can find out exactly how much
Ann
that
and I
is.
have been following it. We're not sure how far
Yeah.
we've risen in the
we were-
priority.
Yeah,
list.
what happens, New York State has like, aid that they did not distribute where people caught, previous aid that wasn't paid and filed necessary reports, and they put it like in a pool of money, and when New York State has that money available, they go back and
Well, they're
knock
talking
off
about
that.
eliminating that
Yeah.
category completely, which means
Yeah.
we wouldn't get anything.
Yeah, so we may lose
So
it,
we
but
don't know about that.
we're not projected, like, if we get it, it'd be like a bonus. So it's
Yeah.
not projected in our current aid of what we anticipate
And
receiving.
it was between $3 and $4 million,
Yeah.
so,
Yeah. So-
as, yeah.
Yep. Budget vote, May 17th, 2022, 12 PM to 9 PM. I'm at those 8 locations. And then moving forward, next week, I'll have to present the budget by state guidelines, the 3 categories that they recommend. And then hopefully by then, we'll also have our final New York State budget numbers. I don't anticipate any, negative increase, any negative impact on the budget from what we've been presenting. But if so, we'll have to look at it. But any negative impact, we should be able to absorb with, the federal funds that we have available.
Yeah, I think the topics that they're still contentious are like bail reform and some other things. Education hasn't really been one of the topics that they can't settle on, so.
Right.
Terry, I do just have
Yeah,
a
that's
little question. It's on 2022-23 proposed budget recap, just the community schools initiative, if you can remind me or talk a little bit about what kinds of things or that we're doing with that bulleted item?
Yeah, so we are kind of doing some stuff now, but we are looking to really formalize the initiative and really designate some of our elementary schools. The one that's probably the most ahead is like MLK. They've got a food pantry, a clothing closet. They're already strengthening their partnership with SICM, have a mobile food pantry. So we want to use, and if you look at our proposed budget, there's a $1.2 million that the district has always gotten for a community school set aside, but it hasn't been used to run necessarily community schools. So we want to try to drive it to more of our elementary schools, designate them, communicate to the community, this is a community school, it'll be open later, it'll be open on weekends, and then you can also come here for, food insecurity, clothing, supports. We're talking to Hometown Health to figure out how else we can leverage them. Maybe there's an opportunity to have a mobile clinic, a health clinic to come through. So those will be things that we'll do, but we're also doing some of those strategies in schools that, quote unquote, may not be designated, like extended learning time. So making sure a school like Page may not be ideal for a community school because there may not be enough of the proximity of it because it's kind of on the border, but they should have an extra extended learning time program. They should have a Saturday opportunity. They should have a couple of community-based organizations that they can partner with that we can fund through this. So what we did as a district, I think it came out this week or either last week, we put out a request for proposal for any community-based organizations to basically indicate interest to partner with us as part of the community schools. And then we would work on proposals where we would obviously pay them for their partnership, but then they would be able to provide services to our kids and to our families in this community school model that would focus on the whole child and whole family as we look to improve academic outcomes.
Now, this is an amount that we are kind of designating and controlling ourselves, right? As
Correct.
opposed to going for the competitive grants that.
Yeah,
were
this is not a
Governor
grant. This
Cuomo's-
is-
It's part of our
Cuomo's-
foundation.
Part of our
aid.
foundation.
It's part of our
Yeah, and
foundation.
we recognize,
It's not part of the, what was it, $50 million, I think, that was in Governor Cuomo's
Community schools.
community
initiative.
schools
Yeah, different.
initiative,
This
and
is
I
different.
don't think we've ever applied for that because we were already getting, so much in
Yeah,
foundation aid. but-
Well, we're going to try to apply for the federal grant because it's a big federal grant.
Did it increase, or is it increasing? I think
It's
it is.
it's from the USD, the governor, Commissioner Cardona, the U.S. Secretary of Education, they've put some dollars for some federal funding for community schools, so we are going to try to pursue that.
But those are
They're very competitive,
competitive grants,
but
right?
they're-
Yeah.
They're worth
Okay.
going after because if we can do this in the middle schools and more in the high schools, we have a clinic there, but like more, it would be great. To
Okay.
the point that I think Jamaica made around mental health, these are the ways we disrupt.
I
it.
just wanted to clarify that this was not part of that competition.
No, but every
for
year,
That purpose.
every year Schenectady's gotten in our foundation
Yeah.
aid a set aside for 1.2, and it's always been community schools. It's in our general fund, which sometimes allows you to be using it. However, what I've asked Terry to do is like, we want to protect that for just community schools work and not use it to, pay for a staff member, pay for
yeah,
something else.
some of that, like STEAM camps that we do,
Right.
Dr. Cotto's event that he held at Boys Club, some of those community events, we use that money for it.
Parent engagement,
Also, some of the schools that had recent work done, and I know this is true at Yates, have already, with some of the building changes, have put in the rooms they will need.
Correct.
to be-
Yeah, so I know some of them
So
put
they
like a
have-
food area.
Yeah.
Right, and like a parent
yep.
room with
Parent room,
computers and their
Okay.
parent liaison there, and so, you know, they,
Okay, thank you.
How was the RFP put out? Were we able to like put it on social media so that we can try to reach folks and make sure that we are really having a
So,
larger outreach?
yep,
and
so
folks
some
are
of the
aware?
folks I'm meeting with, we are emailing it to them directly, like Amadi at Sikkim. They were one of the groups we wanted to target to make sure they go after it. It's always posted on our website. Every RFP we do have, we have to publicly post it on our website under the business office. There's a section for request for proposals. But we do have, I think Darla has an email distribution list that if you're not on, let us know, we can put them on. But we usually send her, there's another CBO we met with, there's another organization we met with, send it to here. And then I know Dr. Coda's working with Bob Carroll at Schenectady Foundation to see who his network is, so we can send it to him so they could respond to it as well. So, but no, we didn't necessarily put it on social media. We just typically are required to post it on our site, and then we've been emailing it because what we have to be careful of, it is a request proposal and there's a competitive bid to it. So we don't want to show any type of like favoritism that we're targeting certain, folks and not other folks.
Well, I guess that was my point of like using every outlet that we have, including social media, because if they're not on our list and someone doesn't know them and we don't have their name yet, here's another opportunity that maybe there's another organization out there that we don't know could actually be providing
Yeah,
services
we
for our
could, we could
kids.
throw it on there, right, Karen? Yeah, we'll put the link up on there.
Are there certain parameters, though? Because I know.
I
with
was gonna
some-
say the
yeah,
same
because I
thing.
know with other types of bids, there are certain parameters.
Yeah, we have
in
to
there.
make sure they have the
All the
proper insurance.
Proper
Yeah.
proper
You know, all
allowance
that
and
stuff.
things like
Yeah.
that.
It's all on the sheet,
Absolutely.
and
Yeah.
what
Yeah.
they're required to have, they have to be,
Yeah.
Yeah.
so there's, most of the organizations that respond to that, they have all that. LLCs, they're established.
I do have another question, and I think you answered it, so it's just more clarification. So a lot of the positions that we are going to be having, right, they're not grant funded. There's some that might be, but they're mostly from our general fund, is that
Yeah.
correct? Okay.
Yep.
Yeah. So the only one that we put in there was the one that we thought was the easiest to
Yeah,
kinda-
to identify to meet the grant requirements also, like learning loss,
Yes.
the mental health pieces. So we identified those positions and allocated those to the federal grants because they have to be a certain percentage of those grants have to be used for those
For that
purposes.
Okay.
Yep.
And again, American Rescue does force us to put certain dollars in certain piles. And so if you go to that slide, you can see kind of the narrative, and then underneath that 41 million, we've put in
Yeah.
summer enrichment after school grant, homeless, learning loss. Those are the kind of the big buckets. But the counselors fall real well into the social emotional student support piece, so that's why it was the easiest one to kind of put in there.
Okay.
And the other clarification is that while we're recommending a 0% increase in the tax levy, and that's where we're going, we actually don't take action on the tax levy until July,
But yeah, I just had to put it in.
after
budget.
all the grievances
Yep.
and all those sort of things that have happened in, as far as property values in the city are
Like, yeah,
concerned.
exactly. So if you would determine, state aid, they take back 3 million, then you may take action to raise the levy.
Yeah. Well, we would hope with the
Yeah, we should not.
delay that they have, that there aren't those kind of meaningful
Yeah,
changes
there hasn't
in
been
the
any
next
word about
in
it,
the
so I don't
next
think so.
week. Yeah, there hasn't been as much activity or worry or concern about that this year as in past years when the budget had not been passed by April 1st, so.
Because we all did such a really good job fighting and winning our schools to be fully funded. We've got that security, and they've made the commitment. So we know that through this year and next year, we'll get those funds.
So, are there any other questions for Terry or clarifications or anything like that? Okay, well, thank you very much. We appreciate the presentation, Terry. Okay, move back. The next item, we have a resolution approving a vaccination requirement for sports participation, and I'll accept a motion to approve this resolution.
so moved.
Second, Bernice?
And Bernice, did you say?
Mhm,
Oh,
yes.
okay, sorry. Didn't catch it quite. Any discussion?
Yes, there's nothing in the resolution that addresses if there is an increase, if there's a change back because of a new variant or something else, us at least, at minimum, at bottom, requiring athletes to wear masks. It's just subject to change as guidance, which leads me to believe that we then go through this process all over again.
Yeah, so just to clarify, one of the things that what I did here was mirrored what the voice of some of the folks were saying around high-risk sports still being required, so we kept that piece. The resolution is subject to change. CDC never mandates vaccination, they only recommend. And so to use those indicators, I think would probably lock us in. The minute an indicator went up, but it didn't go up for somewhere else, we would be more subjected to a more stringent rule. And one of the things we were trying to do as we've moved through this pandemic was to just be more aligned with our region. So I'll give you a perfect example. Our kids on lacrosse would be required, but Rotterdam's kids who Mohanison, we partner, right? We would, they're not required. And so we wanted to kind of draw some more alignment in the policies. But this does give us the flexibility that if some reason CDC says, hey, we're red, it does force us to have the conversation back again. Not we're red, now you automatically got to go back to it. And I think that's what you were asking for.
Right, it's forcing us to have a conversation. I think that we don't have a problem having a conversation. It's that there is no change unless we have a conversation. If we're at a high already, based on our experience and what even our local health department has said, once we get to high, like it's already an issue. I'm wondering, can we at least put language that says masks will become mandatory if the CDC, New York State Department of Health, something. Because when we first had this conversation about vaccination, we very much were about data and statistics and what was in the best interest of our children's health. And it had the largest impact on our Black and brown students who are playing basketball and football. I mean, we heard from the community about how, they were upset that we had the mandatory vaccinations. And those of us who stood here and said, and I was one of them, but this is mandatory because it's about their health. I feel as if we're saying, okay, it was about your health, but now it's, we'll just come back and talk about it again later. If we've already said, we're concerned about their health, is there some other measure that we can put into this resolution, even if it is just masks? Because even when they're not out on the track and they're not out and open, they're in our gyms practicing. So if there's an increase, mandatory masks being worn, I don't think is unreasonable if we have some language about what that looks like. And it's really interesting that it feels like there was, one parent who came and talked about their child might not get a scholarship if they couldn't run on track. But we knew very well how many, and it was a white parent, I'm just gonna say what it was, but we had all kinds of, we had Ray Frazier talk about the impact on Black and brown students. It seems as if we're moving in a direction based on race and not giving enough weight to how are we going to ensure their safety moving forward without having to come back for a discussion.
I took this section to be, this resolution is subject to change as guidance from the CDC and NYS DOH developing as not necessarily requiring board action, but determination that could be made by the staff itself. Is that correct or not?
It's not clear if it is.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't necessarily say the superintendent will adjust policy based on that, but
No.
The intent was, and this is where it is fluid. And Ann, I don't know if you wanted to say something
Well,
first.
I just wanted to say, I think it was based on the fact that the numbers are low and the sports are outside now. It's not indoor sports.
Right, the
So
sports
in
are
the
outside, but
winter-
practice isn't always.
The winter, I think that was more concerning where kids were indoors, in particular, a lot of those sports, they're in very close contact. Whereas for something like track, they're not necessarily in as close contact.
Yeah,
It's
and I'm
spring
wonder-
sports,
I'm sorry.
tennis, whatever,
But they still have
And
weight
I'm
room in those things.
I'm wondering too if it's not as prescriptive because things keep changing, right? Things keep evolving, they keep finding things in science. So if we have it too prescriptive, that may also limit us. So that way, making it more broad and being, being diligent to see what's going on out there in the science with coronavirus or COVID-19, I think it opens it up to be more flexible.
And I could see that it comes back to the board in the fall, if there's, but
Or even the summer.
Yeah, and I think the other thing is that the state may also force athletic rules upon us based on, just like they did before. So the masking requirement for sports was not a Schenectady, it was a Section 2 requirement that kids had to wear the mask when they competed, although they didn't always stay on, but they had to wear them on while they competed. So they were the ones that lifted the mask requirement for indoor sports. It wasn't our necessarily policy. So I guess that's the challenge with this, and so I wanted to make sure that in Section 2, that as soon as we get anything that says it changes, and again, we are currently, Schenectady County is low, so we thought it would be good to shift the measure now, and I did provide some of the information in terms of alignment with other communities who also shifted some of their vaccine requirements. But if the board as a whole would like to change it and make it more specific that says, if we get back into the high, these are the things in there, but then just know that once we enforce that, then, we could have to come back to the board to change it if it doesn't align to state guidance or county guidance for the DOH. So, I mean, that's the tough piece where at least it gives me the requirement to basically stay aligned to the guidance as it comes from the
Local,
CDC
from
and New York State DOH.
Schenectady County and so forth.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, New York State DOH would be the governing body, right?
As far as vaccination, but if we had said, if we reach a level of high, mask will be mandatory for any indoor activities, I don't see how there'd be some state decision that says no. Like,
No, the board could institute, the board has the ability to institute what they feel. The board could require masking now in indoors. You could do that technically now. You would have to put a resolution out and then do that. You could require that. So yes, you could obviously be more stringent, but that would obviously be a collective decision.
Any other comments, questions, discussion? All right. Are we ready to vote? All those in favor of this resolution, please say aye.
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 Any opposed?
Opposed.
And so this motion carries, and so we are not requiring the vaccination.
Except for high-risk sports.
Except for high-risk sports.
Yeah, and that would be
And that in the spring is lacrosse,
Yeah.
basically.
Yep, and then in the fall would be like football.
Yeah. And that's consistent, as you said, with the fact we have a shared team for lacrosse, right, with Mahonison?
Yeah, actually,
And they have the same policy then?
yeah, it would, theirs is not required for high-risk sports. They're one of the only communities that did not
Does not,
do
okay.
that. They
All right, so we'll be at
make it optional.
odds
So our
with
kids
them.
are still at a higher requirement, but in all the other sports, it would align. So track, baseball, tennis, anything else like that.
Okay. All right. And that brings us to adjournment because we have no executive session this evening. So I'll ask for a motion to adjourn the meeting.
So moved, Bernice.
Bernice, second.
Second, Erica.
Erica. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? And that motion carries, and it's 8:08. Okay, thank you. Appreciate the update. We'll be